So it was really strange to go to Copenhagen and see how these groups, in fact, often behind closed doors, but when the European green groups saw what they were doing and the American green groups who don't take money from polluters saw what they were doing, came to me and said, these groups are campaigning for a system that will cause the rainforest to die sooner than global warming requires, or global warming would cause, and they were dismissing the real solutions to global warming as unworkable or politically unrealistic. And so I began on this journey of thinking, why would this happen? Why would these groups, who are funded to some degree by ordinary good Americans concerned with this great crisis, why would they be behaving this way? And the only explanation that anyone can come up with is that they take money from the worst polluters in the world. They are dependent on the worst polluters in the world. We are not talking about all American environmental groups. It is really important for people to know, if they want to know where to give money to, where to campaign with. Greenpeace, 350.org, Friends of the Earth do not accept corporate donations, and as a result do not have a compromised position on the climate science. Now, Lumumba was absolutely right that the behaviour of the big corporate green groups, Conservation International, TNC, and I'm afraid to a lesser but still significant degree the Sierra Club, is very compromised in terms of their approach to policy. I think there are two areas that you can see this in. One is their lobbying within the United States. The climate science, contrary to all the denialism that's been pumped out over the past few months, is actually really clear. By 2020, we need a 40% cut on the emission of warming gases into the atmosphere on 1990 levels if we are going to have a 50% chance of preventing catastrophic global warming. Now, the problem is, the reason for that is that's how we stay the right side of a 2 degrees centigrade rise in temperatures. Now, I know at first that doesn't sound like very much. If you go out one day and you go out for a picnic and it gets colder by 2 degrees or it gets hotter by 2 degrees, you don't feel that bothered. But the global climate is not like a picnic. It's more like your body. If your body temperature increased by 2 degrees and didn't go back down, you would die. It's worth bearing in mind the gap between where we are now and the last ice age is only 6 degrees centigrade. We are setting ourselves on course to go that far in the opposite direction in just a century on some projections. Now, to understand how big that is, the last time the world warmed that rapidly by 6 degrees was 251 million years ago, and the result was almost everything on Earth died. The only thing that survived was a pig creature that had the Earth to itself for another 50 million years. So the climate science is pretty clear, it's pretty shocking, and it's not being supported by these groups. The cut that we need is absolutely clear, and yet when we need a 40% cut, these groups are cheering on pitiful 3% cuts as wonderful, great progress, brilliant, when they should be standing apart from the system and saying these cuts are woefully inadequate, they're way short of what the climate science tells us we need, and they will set us on a path to disaster. Now, these groups claim they're operating within something called political reality. They say we have to acknowledge the political reality of what will pass in Washington. What they don't seem to realise is, in a conflict between political reality and physical reality will win. You can't stand at the edge of a rising sea or a supercharged hurricane and say, I'm sorry, Joe Lieberman says I can't deal with you today. We either deal with the atmosphere's demands or we live with the consequences.
Now, could it be that groups don't have to receive this money? It's just a kind of insider Washington mentality, even if it's in the rest of the world, like with the health insurance debate, that they accept the premises of the opposition and they don't want to go outside of a very small range of what they can ask for. They just don't believe they can get things done.
I think you're absolutely right. That is part of it. It's part of a political culture. Jim Hansen, great man, is not alone. Virtually everyone who doesn't work for these corporate environmental groups, and a lot of people who do, can't understand this behaviour except as a result of the combination of corruption and exactly what you say, a kind of dysfunctional political culture. But again, I don't want to leave your viewers with a downer, because it's really important they understand it doesn't have to be this way. Here in Britain, we've had a really good example of how you work very differently on environmental change. And it works. Instead of trying to work within a corrupt system, instead of constantly praising the pathetic efforts of our governments, a huge coalition of people here in Britain took direct action. An organisation called Climate Camp, a very loose, democratic organisation, began to physically blockade new airports and coal power stations. They said, we will not let this pass. They stood in front of coal trains, and when they were arrested, they said they were acting in their own self-defence, and a jury of their peers acquitted them, saying they were right, this is an emergency, we've got to act. And it's had an amazing effect. All new coal power stations in Britain are under very serious political trouble. They probably won't happen. And airport expansion that was seen as absolutely dead cert, supported by all the main political parties, is now dead in the water. The model of compromise, praise the Democrats, say how wonderful they are, even when they're kicking you in the face, doesn't work. The model of really directly taking to the streets, the way that change has always happened in America and in all of the world. Martin Luther King did not praise every pathetic morsel that came from the Democratic Party. He called people to the streets and they fought for it, and it took a long time. But it's also important for people to understand there's a difference in the civil rights movement as well. We need to adopt those tactics. Oh, OK, well, in that case, I won't say it.
Johann Hari, I want to thank you very much for being with us. We will link to your article. He writes for the London Independent, his latest article, The Wrong Kind of Green, in The Nation magazine.